On today's episode, we ponder some alternate realities, like what if only men paid taxes? Or there was only one source of news and information for everyone? Or a world where Christians were hated for having progressive values? Additionally, we talk about the wrong reasons to dunk on Nikki Haley and the brave, bold stance of David French on the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. This is Cringe Posts. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Cringe Post podcast, the show where we take on those bad online takes that you see that they just rile you up and you don't know how to take them down, or you don't have the time to. You don't want to get into that flame war online. And so we do that for you. We just provide that safe space for you to sit back and laugh and learn, hopefully. My name is Donald.
And I'm Britt.
And today we have our special guest, Jeremy Swingle. Jeremy, do you want to introduce yourself and give any sort of shout-outs to any projects or podcasts you might be on?
Oh, yeah, perhaps. Yeah. So, hey, everybody. Thanks, Donald and Britt, for letting me be on the podcast today. And I have a podcast of my own. My co-host, John, and I, we tackle famous Bible verses, and they're taken out of context by a lot of prominent Christians in the evangelical space. So if you're a Christian or just curious about the various verses that are famous that you may misunderstand, go ahead and check us out at the John 3:15 podcast. And hopefully you guys will give a link on your show notes or whatever it is that you do. I'm hoping you'll plug it.
I don't know. You might have to grease my palm a little bit.
Okay, well, we'll see how this episode goes first. And I believe we're going to do a crossover, and you'll be on it on our next episode, Donald. So.
Yeah, well, if that's the case, then maybe we can leave a link. Then in that case, I think that sounds fine for me. So just to clarify, you're saying that when people tell me that Jesus told me to judge not, that just isn't the entire context right there, and I'm never supposed to make any judgments ever?
Clearly what Jesus meant in that passage is that you should never have any sort of moral judgment about anything. So, if your neighbor is a murderer, you should definitely, don't cast the first stone, right? You got.
You're right. Well, I that makes me feel a little bit bad about this show, because this show does a lot of judging. But you know what? We start by judging ourselves. But before we judge ourselves, I just want to remind our listeners to please subscribe, comment, share, all that good stuff. Get us in the algorithm. We have a great listening base, and we're growing, and we love that, and we would love to continue growing. So please make sure to do that. So, speaking of judging, let's judge our guest on the show, Jeremy. Now, Jeremy does have a bit of superiority to Britt and I, and that involves him not actually having much of a social media presence. I believe you've purged it all. So we don't have an actual cringe post for Jeremy. However, he has graciously accepted the role of sharing his cringe past rather than a cringe post. So I'll let you take it over from here, Jeremy.
Yeah, I actually purged it all specifically because I was worried about my appearance on your podcast. So, no, just kidding. I've been on Facebook for several years. Okay, so I'm a religious listener to this podcast, guys. I've heard every episode, big fan of it, and so I noticed that you guys tend to pick your own cringe posts from sort of the middle school, early high school era. All those cringy, like putting your emotions out there for the whole world to see on Facebook. Those are fun. I figured, even though I don't have my Facebook footprint from when I was in 8th grade, and it would be terrifying, I assure you. I'm sort of glad I didn't get to rummage through it. I do have a cringe story from middle school, which is fun to look back on now. When I, in social studies class, I think in 7th grade, I did a whole presentation on drug abuse and illegal drugs.
Oh, no.
Where this is going, right? And, I'm like
Cop.
I'm like a good Christian kid, right? I don't inject the marijuanas or any of that stuff, right? I know all my friends do because they're pagans and they don't. So that's my attitude, right? And I go in front of the class and I'm all, yeah, drugs are really bad and you shouldn't abuse them. And like, we really need to up the police presence in like the inner cities in order to get these drugs off the streets, right? And I like really hammered that home. I don't remember what I said, but it was looking back on it, very cringy. And probably not the best way to actually get the drugs off the streets. But the reason I remember the story is that the teacher of the class said to me, "Oh yeah, it was really good, Jeremy." And I think he was being polite, And, I mean, I don't know what his politics were, but he said something to the effect of like, actually, it's not just people in the inner city who do drugs. They're finding that like rich people also have a problem with it because they have a lot of disposable income. And so, like, maybe you also got to get more police in the rich areas. So there you go. There's a little bit of me trying to be the conservative politician in my middle school classroom. I think at one time I also made an argument about, like, why we need to reinstitute school prayer and stuff. And I probably didn't have a good argument for it.
Well, I like that story ended with almost redemption from that teacher pointing out, it's actually not just an inner city, issue. So we need more cops everywhere. Like, oh man,
for sure,
wrong takeaway.
Well, at least their parents can afford to, get a good lawyer, right? So it's
yeah, exactly. And as we're going to talk about later, there's nothing wrong at all with our court system and prosecutors or anything like that, or defendants. So no issues whatsoever. Just a little preview there. All right, well, thank you for sharing that. We're going to move to our first cringe post, and we're going to launch the first post off with my favorite recurring segment called Accidentally Based. And we've got our Accidentally Based post here from a verified user, one of the few verified. I think most of our cringes today are non-verified, so we will not out most of them, but we will out Dana Dawn, who tweets, "What if only men paid taxes? Something to think about." And I, for one, am all in favor of that, because that means half our tax burden in my household is gone.
Yeah, my wife does all the grocery shopping, so there's a lot of sales tax just right off her. I'll just have her buy like a house someday for us, get us a mortgage. Easy.
Yeah. The unintended consequences of a policy like this would be really hilarious to see. Like like all the different loopholes, and like when you get with your tax, person at the end of the year, it's like, no. Like that expense was done by my wife. So it's, I have a picture of her, buying this or working this, and I don't work at all. Or, with modern day stuff, I could just identify as a woman when I go to work. That would probably be how I should do it. That'd be the right way.
So I was going to say, I mean, like, you'd have a huge increase in women-owned businesses. And so I think that this is just an absolute win for wokes everywhere, right? I think we've always wanted to see more women in places of leadership and influence in business, and I think you'd see a lot more of that if only men paid taxes. I don't know.
It reminds me of the classic wage gap myth where yes. Folks are like, it's like, well, if that was really true, don't you think that businesses would just hire women because they would have a 25% advantage over their competition, which obviously in reality doesn't work.
You don't understand, Britt. It's just that men are so sexist that they just won't hire them, even though it makes financial sense. It is a price they are willing to pay.
And they'd be willing to pay taxes themselves to uphold that sexism.
Exactly.
It's all those golf games with the boys after work. It's worth the 25%. It's worth the, having a little bit less enthusiastic meeting with your shareholders,
Right. Well, as all of us are aware, every small business that has opened is just rolling in cash, and every small business owner who's a man is just rolling in that freedom to discriminate against capable employees if they are female, because goodness knows that if you could save 5% on an employee, but you have to deal with a woman, you're not going to do that, right? Now, of course, that's absurd. And of course, this cringe post, I mean, it's one of those that's like, we're just kind of joking this entire time because it's just so obviously such a dumb concept. What if only men paid taxes? Well, the funny thing about it, too, is it's like, for the vast majority of civilization, men were the only ones paying taxes. And like the most of the history of the United States, basically men only paid taxes in a meaningful way in terms of like income taxes and things like that. And so to say like, what if only men pay taxes? Okay, look at the majority of our country's history, and we've still built this horrible taxing apparatus to be this monster that it is today. My guess is that the implication of this tweet is that, if only men paid taxes, they would realize that like, it's that they'd reduce it, or they'd make it less complex because it's affecting only them, or I don't know exactly.
That's a really charitable. See, my take on it was this Dana Dawn or whatever their name is. My take was they were saying, well, because men have had so much privilege the past however many hundreds of years, they need to be, their wealth needs to be redistributed. which is ironic, right? Because like I love Jordan Peterson's take on this. Where he's like, hey, well, like, who are the men or women who like did more men die in wars over the past several centuries or more women? It's like 99.9% are men. Most men are homeless. Most men are the ones that end up paying alimony. Most men are the one that commits suicide. Most men are the most likely to be in a job that actually ends up in a fatality. So it's like there's this narrative, and we're taught it in school, right? Basically, like history began when women's voting rights came into play, right? And it's like, no, like women were not. There was like biological necessity for men to fulfill the roles that they did, basically up until that point, and women to fulfill the roles that they did up until that point. And just because men worked, it wasn't because like, oh, we were trying to push women down or anything like that. That's just how the world worked. Like it was reality. Life was hard, and men were better equipped biologically to deal with the work, while women were better biologically equipped to deal with things at home. And that's changed a bit, but it doesn't mean that all of history is men oppressing women.
Well, what would be the unintended consequence of this too? It would just mean women would be less interested in politics, like long term, wouldn't it? I mean, it kind of goes back to like the same argument that women actually made against the first wave feminists who wanted the right to vote. They're like, no, shut up. We don't want the right to vote. Then they'll make us go to war and stuff. And like, I'll do all the other stuff that men do that we don't want to do. And that was a real argument that a lot of people put against the first wave feminists. It's kind of like the similar principle. You got to think about the unintended consequences here. If you really want this to push this kind of like feminist angle and redistribute wealth to the ladies, well, they're going to be less interested in politics if it doesn't directly affect their bank account.
Well, you might have a very strong lobby of like Hillary Clintonites who are just lobbying for that tax protection, and that's it. So the only women you get involved are just the kinds who are just special interest in keeping tax exempt status, I guess.
It's kind of like abortion right now, right? It's like the hordes of women who only are interested in politics to the extent that they maintain the right to abort, right?
Right. Well, actually, and that is the crazy thing too, is because I think when you look at the whole of it, more women tend to identify pro-life, as just like it's a very even split. But I think it's generally women are more. But the ones who are politically engaged, like you point out, are usually not that way, and it's because the ones who are pro-life are usually, I don't know, living life like normal human beings. They're not weirdos obsessed with politics like us to some degree. So. I think your point is to stand pretty well there. That I think the ones who would be involved, or the ones who the good ones who should be involved would be less involved. Yeah. Well, unless either of you guys have any more on this accidentally based post, because I guess the last thing I will say is, of course, my first thought when I first saw this was the classic Ron Paul quote, which I mentioned in our last episode, I believe, about only half of people pay taxes, and he's like, we're halfway there. So this kind of made me think of that again. There's so many things that make me think of that Ron Paul quote, and this is one of them. What if only men paid taxes? We'd be halfway there. So good take there, accidentally. Okay, so we'll move on to our next cringe post, and this one starts out with our verified CNN potato, Brian Stelter, who tweets, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a regular on quote-unquote corporate media, shows like Maria is it Bartiromo? I don't know how to pronounce her name. I don't watch Fox News, but I'm aware she's a Fox Business anchor, says, we all know corporate media lies, okay? They do not tell the truth. Assume what they tell you is false, and then figure out why they're not telling you, or why they're telling you a false narrative. And he quote retweets himself saying, the GOP's anti-media streak summarized. Governor of one of the biggest states in the USA says citizens should assume news outlets are lying to them. And then there's a reply from someone who says, I'm a Democrat and I have major media skepticism. It just isn't right. You guys need to look inward and fix what is broken. Great. And then there's a reply that's one of those people who sort of like comes to your side and then starts saying all the wrong things. They're like, oh no, dang it. This other person replies, totally. It's so frustrating and creates so much friction for Americans that literally have to read 8 to 10 sources for the same event and even go to the original video and then discern the truth the best they can tell. A society cannot function that way. So if it's not
Almost.
immediately obvious, yeah, right? It's not immediately obvious. What I wanted to point out about the last, obviously Brian Stelter's very cringe. Like, they're saying the media lies, and it's like, yeah, look at anything in the past 20 years, let alone further. But this person is saying, like, yeah, it's so frustrating that you have to read 8 to 10 different sources. You can't just find the one source that's going to give you the truth. It's like, yeah, that's the whole point, is like, we had 1 or 2 sources in the past and they were lying. Like, a society can't function that. What do you mean? Like, you have to have a bunch of different, you have to put in the work yourself. You can't just be spoon-fed the news and just accept it and buy it, because that's how you get media deception. It's like, he's complaining and being like, yeah, we can't like go around, putting in effort to discern the truth. We just should have the one narrative that's right. What? I don't know. Does that rub either of you the wrong way like it did me?
I think my favorite part is the society not being able to function that way. It's like a society cannot function with people doing independent research and coming to like informed, perhaps incorrect, but informed conclusions from cross-comparing sources. I just, that would just create utter chaos. How can we possibly...
Allow not having one narrative rule the country, Imagine that. They can't function that way.
Yeah, it reminds me of, like, I saw this post the other day from CNN, which was basically comparing, it was for Veterans Day. Soldiers are great and all, but, we should also honor, our journalists because they guard the truth. And it's kind of like this, it's very boomer-ish, but, I mean, it's also, kind of in our generation as well, but this like belief in that, like, oh, journalists like get to the truth and all this stuff. And there was a day way back when we could rely on, Walter Cronkite to give us the news straight and just there and everything's good. It's like, dude, the only reason why we didn't realize it was a lie was because we didn't have the internet yet, right? You couldn't check those 8 to 10 sources and, go to the original video and then like think about it and have all these different perspectives. And that whole facade of of them being the people that can give us the truth was torn down once all the information was opened up to all of us, right? Why do you think they hate the all the internet so much, right? And the free flow of information, it takes away their ability to monopolize it.
Absolutely. It strikes me as because like the corporate media and the government really are one front at this point. And so when the media is complaining about sort of the one narrative not being torn down, you might might be tempted to think, oh, it's just big media, but you realize how in bed they are with government narratives. You think about the fact, like right now, a great example is how the FBI raided James O'Keefe, who's the guy behind Project Veritas, that organization that has gone undercover and exposed a lot of government things, a lot of media things behind the scene. So the FBI raids his apartment, steals a bunch of his stuff, trashes his place, takes his information, and then gives information about Project Veritas and James O'Keefe to the New York Times, who are currently engaged in a lawsuit with him. So the government is interjecting, storming this dude's things, taking their private information and giving it to an opponent in a court proceeding. Like, that is wild, and it makes you see how linked these things really are. And so it's just really funny when this person's frustrated they have to go to 8 to 10 different sources, and it's like, gosh, I'm glad that there are 8 to 10 different sources out there, because like you were saying earlier, like there used to be the one source that we didn't have those 8 to 10 sources to fact check and to be able to hold accountable. And it really links back to it being a force for the government wing of media, to be honest. So, yeah. And
having those 8 to 10 different sources creates competition in the marketplace. If people eventually come to discover, hey, I think MSNBC is lying to me, right? You think? So then you can discover alternative sources, which a lot of people have done in the age of the internet. And as was already alluded to, it's like, that's why they're trying to crack down on being able to say whatever you want on Twitter. And the algorithms in YouTube are, striking people down and such. It's because they want people to listen to the one narrative, and the illusion of choice that is the, several major corporate journalist outlets, but it's actually the same opinion.
Right.
Yeah. I think that, basically ever since for forever with government. They've always operated under this facade that they have a big, nice button, and that if you elect them, they're going to push it, and all your problems are going to go away. And what the internet has done has taken that away from them, right? Any success that they can try and claim, like they can't. It's now obvious that it wasn't their doing, right? And any failure that happens, like you can directly trace it back to whatever their actions were. And so that's why it's so important for them to keep that narrative, right? And that's why they're pushing this COVID thing, is because it's like, hey, like if we tell you to do this, it's going to get better. And then once it becomes clear that everything that they try to do, everything that they say will help or won't help, or what makes things worse isn't actually coming true, like they have no other option but to keep pressing forward, right? Because they have to maintain that facade for these folks, like the guy that was just saying, hey, I want to have one truth, because their whole goal is like, hey, I just want people to rely on us to give them, their information and their safety and all that stuff, because then they'll keep voting for us and keep putting dollars in our pockets. The second you kind of strip that away from them, they're powerless, right? They're useless, right? The government doesn't create anything. They just take things, and when you reveal that they are, utter failures and they're not impressive people, their entire ability to do that is taken away.
And what's crazy too is like we talk a lot in broad strokes with like national outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and we talk about broad strokes of like the government's sort of national view, but this is happening on local levels too. Like in Washington State, we have sort of a major coverage called Q13 Fox. They cover a lot of Washington, and they had a reporter named Brandy Cruz, and she was always she was kind of what I considered like the last honest journalist in Washington State, where she actually would ask Governor Inslee questions at his press conferences when he said something that wouldn't make sense, and she would follow up when he would give a non-answer, those kinds of things. She just quit because she said that she felt she could no longer do her job of being presenting fair views and stuff at that network. So she's going completely independent. And here's the thing: she's not like a libertarian by any means. She's not of my political persuasion. We probably agree on some things, and we probably disagree on a lot more. But the fact that someone that sort of in the moderate, like I'm not extreme in either direction, someone like that feels this way, where they can't do their job in a media and has to go independent, that's pretty telling when it's on the state level too. It's not even like this hyper polarized, atmosphere of like DC or national. This is Washington State. That's really, really bad. So it's kind of a sensation that's happening on all different levels, not even just the top ones. So
it's just really tragic. We need to do something about it so that there can just be the one correct source.
Right? Dang it, you're right. You're right. We just need to listen to Brandy Cruz. She will never get anything wrong, and she will be the one source that all of us can go to and get the narrative from. All right. Well, unless you guys have any last thoughts on that, we'll move to
I'm just so disappointed in this person. They're almost there.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Okay, and so this one we've got now. Here's the thing: this person is not Twitter verified. Jeremy, I will leave it to your discernment if we can name this person, because they are probably well known in the evangelical circles. Because we did want to pick one that was a little bit more crossovery between our shows, that had that sort of common ground between political cringe and like somehow like theological implication or person or personality. So I will let you determine if we want to out him. For now, I will not. But this person tweets, "I miss the gold old days when the Romans hated..." I'm assuming that's supposed to be good old days and it's a typo, but I kind of like gold old days. "I miss the gold old days when the Romans hated Christians for being pro-women, pro-slave, and pro-child."
There's like so much that's wrong with this. It's not even... So like maybe explaining the context a little bit for any listeners who don't understand the evangelical, I guess, Twitterverse, which I hope is everybody. Gosh, nobody should be on evangelical Twitter. So I won't dox him, not for moral reasons, just because I don't think it's necessary to the point.
Sure. Yeah.
He's a well-known evangelical New Testament scholar, writes plenty of books. He's got like 20,000 Twitter followers or something. So, but this he's kind of like responding to this idea that like, oh yeah, non-Christians hate Christians in the West because of their stance on things like COVID, policy and for voting for Trump and for being against, I would presume, I'm putting words in his mouth, but I would presume, things such as Medicare for all, right? Or kind of the rhetoric of, oh, you guys are only pro-life until the baby's born, and then you don't care about, what happens to the child and all this stuff. So that's his idea here, is he doesn't actually miss the days when the Romans hated Christians, which that sarcasm might be hard to come across on the tweet, but he's making a commentary about kind of conservative, or we might just say generally right-wing evangelicals today. So,
and what's funny is this, I'm not as in the evangelical Twitter world as much, and so I was kind of unaware of this sect of people who and I don't know this individual in particular, but people whose theology I really like. When they wade into politics, how cringy it gets. I was kind of unaware of this, blissfully unaware, I will say, until some conversations with Jeremy. And then he unfortunately opened my eyes in a very painful way to some people who I really like their theology. And then they'll say something kind of dumb like this. And you're like, dude, how are you so ignorant on this? Like,
I saw this guy debate Bart Ehrman, a critical atheist scholar of the Bible. I saw him live several years ago debate and destroy Bart Ehrman on the topic of the divinity of Jesus, basically arguing Bart Ehrman was trying to say that Paul didn't think Jesus was God, right? Which is just absurd. Mm-hmm. And Michael Bird, oh, sorry, I just outed him. His name's Michael Bird. Accidentally. He destroyed him. It was great. I really like this guy. And then I just see his Twitter takes. I'm like, oh, gosh. He lives in Australia, too, and he isn't critical of his government. So that tells you everything you need to know about his...
Yeah.
I don't know this guy at all, but like and I guess we're kind of like choosing what position he's, who he's referring to, because there's definitely like really cringe conservative Christian folks like out there that are like our right to bear arms is like synonymous with being a good Christian and things like that, which I view as kind of cringe, but or like the thin blue line and Christianity and all that. But what's so funny about this guy, it's like I feel like this is such an irresponsible tweet, because it's like, if you're going off the general evangelical view of what is good for humans, right? What is good for human flourishing? Like, Christians are very pro-woman, right? Like, the views that we hold that are like, hey, women should and men should be married, right? They shouldn't be getting together outside of wedlock. That women are fundamentally different than men, and that's not a bad thing, but that's just a thing of like, hey, God created us, differently and with different purposes in mind. Like, that is when you look at like the secular left that like hates on Christians for that. That's the points that they're attacking, right? All the points that we say are essential for human flourishing and women flourishing. So it's like, yeah, they don't like us for that, right? And then pro-slave, right? Like, if you're looking about like libertarian Christians, right? It's like, we view taxation as theft, right? At what point does someone taking my income from me with no choice on my end, or saying that my labor is subject to their, taxation, when does that become, I'm not a slave, right? Is it 1%? Is it 10%? Is it 100%? Libertarians view it as, basically any time someone takes your labor from you, they're trying to make you a slave. So yeah, we're pretty pro, like, hey, like we want people to be free. And then pro-child, like, are you kidding me? Like the reason they don't like us is because of that we're very pro-child in every single way. We're not only pro-child like in the womb, but we're also pro-child when it comes out of the womb. When we're like, hey, like, children should be raised in such a way that sets them up to be, best for their flourishing, right? Like, that's all Christian. Like, that's God's view, right? He wants us to be fruitful and to multiply. And the views that most Christians hold are conducive to that. And they're not only conducive like in modern day, but they've been conducive throughout all of history, right? And Christians haven't always lived up to that, and which is true. But like, yeah. And then the last point I'll have on this is like, the reason the Romans hated, the Christians was not because they were any of those things. Maybe that was part of it. But it's one, because the government told them to hate Christians, right? Nero blamed the fire in Rome on Christians because he was like, I don't really like that these Christians say that there's a power above me, over these people, because he felt that subverted them. And I think we see that also in our modern day, where it's like, we're saying, hey, there's a moral standard that is above the government. We don't need the government to tell us how to be moral. We have a God that tells us, and people don't like that. People don't like that we think that way, and because then they can't control.
I will say, I think at least the Romans didn't have to deal with 8 to 10 different sources saying who started the fire. I'm just really glad that there was the one narrative that they could get. It was the Christians. That's what it was.
The one true source said it. I mean, you didn't have to do the thinking.
Exactly. Well, the source said that there was not a source above him, so we have to believe the source. Kind of tautological there. I will say, yeah, the thing that makes me laugh is when I think about, like, I wonder who he's equating the in the Romans in that context. Obviously, he's not necessarily saying I want Christians to be hated. He's more of saying I want Christians to be these different things. But really, like Britt was pointing out, I especially want to harp on that last one, the pro-child one. It's like, gosh, a lot of us, let's just assume that he's talking about sort of this more conservative strain of Christianity, even though he's talking about Christians and not necessarily libertarian or political right necessarily. I think that's pretty targeted to what he's going for here. Man, obviously there's the pro-life side of things where we're kind of like, well, no, you don't get to kill a child just because it's in a womb. Second, we think that, we actually support family structures that are not only just like ethically from our view moral, like, a father and a mother in a household that are married and committed, but just like based on every sort of social study there is, the healthiest outcome for children is that dynamic. So that's what we support, which is, you can argue, oppressive to the man or the woman because they have to make a commitment, but you can't argue that that's oppressive for the child because statistically that is the best outcome for the child. And also I would argue that it's very pro-woman, since the sexual revolution and the advent of birth control has by and large really harmed women with men who can get away without consequence of their sexual gratification and then abandoning women, while women often have to be. And the birth control, I think, justified it in men's heads often because it wasn't always left that way, but often the consequences still lay with women. So that sort of nuclear family dynamic is still more conducive to women as a protection idea too. And then also, even when it comes to policies like education, like, most most conservatives don't even want to abolish public school, which I think is a shame. They should. But the conservative position, you could say, is sure, public school, but also private school and also like charter school. It's like all the choices. And with libertarians, we think, well, let's just make all education better by privatizing it and making there be competitive marketplaces. But the point is that, like, there should be choice in the matter. You shouldn't be forced. And very pro-slave in the sense that we should liberate the slaves in the public education system who have no choice, who are locked in by their zip code, locked in by the prohibitive costs of private school because of the monopoly in that sector, things like that. So it's like all of these different policies end up being pro-women, pro-slave, and pro-child. And so I'm just like, who does he want to hate us in this scenario? Who does he want the Romans to be? Because right now it seems like, I don't know, we're doing a pretty good job of being pro-women, pro-slave, and pro-child.
Well, you guys hit at, I think, what is the crux of the cringe, might I say. You're welcome to trademark that and use it as a segment on your podcast. But like the crux of the cringe is this like, who is he talking about? Like, it's this and to introduce you a little more to the world of lefty Twitter, and sort of what we might call big evangelicalism in general, which is sort of, the people who are on the speaking tours and who write the books that get published, who write for Christianity Today, and who write op-eds for the New York Times as the token evangelical. These sorts of people who all live in New York and DC and LA, by the way. They're pretty much just regime theologians who try to dress up, obedience to the state in a Christian garb. And kind of their mode of operation is that they thoughtfully engage the left and they punch right. They don't do this, which I would consider to be the correct approach if you're a public thinker, and I guess claiming the name of Christ as a component of your public thinking, is, you would tackle both. Like, yeah, you should talk about Donald Trump's womanizing. You should talk about his boorishness or just in general, or his kind of like faux commitment to what I would consider to be a faux commitment to Christianity.
2 Corinthians, man.
Right, yeah. All these things, sure, those are fair topics of conversation, and they'll talk about those things. Okay, good. But then they don't talk about, like, I don't know, just the egregious evils of the left. Like, if they just want to talk about character, Biden's got plenty of character flaws, dude. Like, at least as many as Trump. Kamala Harris, like...
Well, I mean, like they'll talk about, wow, Joe Biden's only the second Catholic president we've ever had. Yeah, he's also the first is he excommunicated? I think he's held in. He's
not allowed to take the sacrament.
He's prevented from taking communion, at least. I don't think he's quite excommunicated, but he's not allowed to take communion. How about pointing that out rather than the second Catholic president? He's the first one to not be able to take communion while in the office. Probably should be the second, to be honest. JFK was a little sketchy too, but
It takes a lot, by the way, to get the Catholic Church to do that. And I'm not Catholic. Yeah. I'm just saying they don't excommunicate people nearly as much as Scripture says we should excommunicate people from the table. But
Father James Martin exists, so we know that there is a hesitance to do those kinds of things.
So yeah, you just see this kind of like selective engagement. I guess selective. It's like they're trying to be prophets and like call out the sins of the culture, but somehow they only do it to the side that seems to be way less egregiously in sin. And then if you criticize them on that, they're like, well, you're justifying Donald Trump's womanizing. It's like, no, you're justifying everything else. It's like, so Michael Bird is sort of doing that here. I think it's this like critique of the stereotyped evangelical that Britt was mentioning earlier. Sort of like the Second Amendment is tantamount to piety and faithfulness to Christ sort of thing. And that's sort of this, I don't know, it's the ethos he's imbibing in this tweet, I think.
Yeah. I agree. Well, unless there's any other takes on this take, we'll move to the next one. The last thing I'll say is that no matter what you guys think, I think Jesus was my favorite U.S. president. So take that as you will. But we'll move on to our next cringe here. And this one is quote tweeting Nikki Haley. Now, it's a video of Nikki Haley. And here's the thing. This one's almost accidentally based, too. I was really excited because I just saw the first tweet at first, okay? So the first tweet reads, I'm done with red no matter who. I would never vote for this woman. And I saw this video of Nikki Haley. So I'm like, oh, great. I'm really excited. I want to watch this Nikki Haley video so that I can put this in as a cringe. And I watched the video, and her tweet with the video reads, conservatives must not turn their backs on capitalism. Well, I'm going, that's an okay headline. And I listened to this video, and she goes on for a minute talking about the greatness of capitalism. And I'm like, well, I don't hate any of this. I like this. And I look at the follow-up tweet from this guy, and he says, simping for Israel. It's like, okay, yeah, I don't support that necessarily. Like the nation save Israel. Yeah, sure, okay. No tariffs. Huh? No trust busting. Free trade. Endless legal immigration. No thanks. It's like, oh, dude. Of all the things to criticize Nikki Haley for, you pick like the things that she doesn't even really support, but pretends to support. Holy crap. How much of a miss is that?
Top 10 worst Nikki Haley opinions. Honorable mention, warmongering.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do you drop that one? I mean, like, this person I think is sort of a MAGA type, and it's like, dude, if you actually are a MAGA type, why aren't you even bringing up like the number one issue Trump brought up in his campaign about like foreign intervention? My goodness, what a bad take.
Yeah, this is kind of like we were talking about earlier, like the conservative cringe, right? Which is very much like they don't have good reasons for believing in these things. Like, we need tariffs and we need to break up monopolies and we need to bring manufacturing back to the United States. But because they have the one source of information, that's telling them to do that, that's why they're like, oh, like we've got to have that. It makes me think of, like I work I'm a co-founder of a technology company, and one of the products we build, every year, like building owners will spend $30 billion having people do diagnostic measurements of equipment, right? And we build a system that for $100, it monitors all those things automatically, 24/7. So it's infinitely better and a lot less expensive. And I literally had a technician tell me, yeah, like I hate your product, not because it's not good. It literally does everything I do, and it does it better, and it saves people money and makes life better. But I hate it because it's going to put me out of a job, and I'm going to do everything I can to make it not succeed. And I was like, that's when it hit me. It's like, oh, like these are the folks, these are the horse and buggy makers that were trying to figure out how to do away with the car, back in the 1900s, right? And they're fed this. It's very similar to the left in that they're fed this thing of like, hey, if you just elect conservatives, they're going to make you safe and comfortable and happy. They've got the big safe and comfortable happy button. And just push it and don't vote for anyone that challenges that status quo because they're not going to be able to keep you safe and happy. The sad part about it, though, is that technology and innovation and free markets and all these things, they're inevitable. To pull a little bit of a Thanos there, they're inevitable. They're going to happen no matter what. And these folks are going to still continue to buy the lie, and feed money into these people that don't have their best interests in mind.
Wait, Nikki Haley doesn't have my best interests in mind? Are you out of your mind?
Well, I mean, goodness, let's take all of these things that he lists and let's pretend Nikki Haley is for them. Okay. Simping for Israel. Okay, that one would be bad. That's actually probably the one she does, right? Like that's the one maybe
she
accurate
does do that
thing here.
Yeah.
Maybe the second one would be the endless legal immigration. That one's like, okay, she probably would advocate for that. My guess is she probably touts the line that she doesn't, though. I don't know. Well, I don't really. Immigration to me is one of those like, I kind of understand both perspectives issue. I'm okay with legal immigration, but we do need to end entitlements. Like, let's just do that. But like at the end of the day, we also shouldn't necessarily have a government or a group of people saying you can't move here if you buy property here, right? So like, let's just end government programs. Let that be a legal form of immigration, right? And I'm happy. But like, no tariffs. Man, I really hope she's not against tariffs because I'll tell you right now, especially with supply chain issues and with inflation, I will take all of the tax cuts I can get. And if we have no tariffs, that's a tax cut. If you reduce and remove tariffs, that's a tax cut. No trust busting. Wonderful. Because I don't know. It seems to me like every time we've trust busted, the government gets more control of an industry. It picks winners and losers. And then you end up with segments of industry that now have government sticking its fingers in the honeypot into. Okay, so that sounds good. I wish he was for that. Free trade. That would be great. Free exchange helps you specialize. It helps you get things at cheaper costs. It helps you be able to afford technologies like the machines building, the supplies for that to make that a possibility. And then, yeah, the technician is out of a job in his traditional line of work, but someone who's learned that skill set is capable. They can learn to do other things, and you always are going to have that shift, like you mentioned. So free trade is a good thing. It can be painful at times, but it's a good thing for human flourishing. So if she was for all those things, man, I would be tempted to vote for her. Unfortunately, we know the only thing that she's really committed to is intervening in the Middle East. I think that's probably the only thing that we can consistently say she is for, and that's not even on this guy's honorable mention.
You know who I think this person would really want to be president based on their list here?
Who's that?
Obama.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Literally every way.
No.
Like, he just wants Obama. I mean, maybe without, like, the, Elena Kagan on the Supreme Court or whatever, but...
Yeah.
For the most part.
I mean, heck, you could really describe Obama. You could describe George Bush. You could describe Bill Clinton. All of them kind of fall in these categories in many, many ways.
They're all simps for Israel. That's
Yeah, simps for Israel. I mean, gosh, like that is a really funny point. This is just you're just describing. It's like this guy needs to take the I side with political quiz, and then he's gonna come out like the candidate you side most with is like Obama. He's gonna be like, what?
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd be happy to go back to the Obama years, sitting here in 2021.
Yeah. The tariffs one, whenever I get from a conservative, like, well, we need tariffs because like they're going to take all of our jobs over there and everything. I bring up the Obama tire policy, right, where they put the tariffs on tires to save tire jobs, and saved 1,200 tire jobs at a cost of $926,000, right, per job. Right. So to save a $50,000 a year job, they spent $926,000. It's like, that sounds like a pretty poor return on investment. That's the opposite way when you look at it on the balance sheet of where you want it to go. Spent $926,000 to make $50,000. I don't know. I don't know if that's good.
It's funny because like that. I mean, at that point, then you almost have those. The people really show their true form where they're like, well, then the government should just pay people in those transition things. They're like, aha, you're not small government now, are you?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Oh man. Any other takes on this Nikki Haley one, or
No.
are we good to move on to our last post here? Okay. I think we are good. We'll move on. All right. And for this last one, we do have a verified person. So maybe most of these were verified. I don't know. Here we have David French tweeting.
Not even once with David French. Sorry.
Not even once. Don't go full David French. The movement to make a hero out of Kyle Rittenhouse is both ridiculous and dangerous. He was a foolish kid wielding a deadly weapon. But even foolish kids have a right to self-defense. Based on the evidence, acquittal is reasonable. Validation is not. And then he links to his article at The Atlantic, which, maybe that could be our one source of true information, because I don't know. They seem like they always have the best takes. I don't know.
Well, David French writes for them, so clearly.
The thing is that's sad is pre-Trump years, David French was actually pretty good. He was pretty okay. I liked following his stuff. There was a lot of people at National Review who I liked pre-Trump. Charles Cook, Kevin Williamson, David French, all of them were like pretty reasonable, libertarian-ish conservative. I didn't agree with them on everything, but they wrote generally okay things. David French went full Trump derangement syndrome. It's wild.
David French, I believe, belongs to my denomination, the Presbyterian Church in America. I consider him one of the big Eva guys. He's writing mostly in the political sphere and not the theological, but I just think he's... he just... All he does is write pieces slandering evangelicals. Like and Trump voters. And I'm no like Trump simp, but it's just like they're slanderous. Anyways, on point though.
Yeah. So I read this whole article that he wrote here, and let's get the good stuff out of the way. Okay. He assures multiple times repeatedly that acquittal would be reasonable because he does exercise self-defense and he believes in Second Amendment rights and the right to defend yourself is tantamount, and it looks like it was exercised in this case of Kyle Rittenhouse, and that would be fine and reasonable. So those are all good things, and I'm like, great, you didn't go full total off the deep end, at least you're recognizing that. The problem is he makes it this big virtue signaling epic about how the right is making him a hero when he went out recklessly as a 17-year-old with an adult weapon, and how he went out looking for danger and trouble. And here's the thing to me is it's like, look, he could have done something that was stupid from a safety standpoint, right? Like he could, if I was his dad, I might say, man, son, I don't know if I'd go out there. It could be really dangerous. There's a lot that could happen in trouble. But to pretend that it was like this stupid, reckless, like, I'm just going out here because I'm a 17-year-old wackadoodle. It's like, no, he's actually going out there to help. He was going out there scrubbing graffiti for 2 hours, giving people CPR, and trying to protect private property. Even if, and I'm not even making this clip, but even if the way he did those things was not the most reasonable, the most effective or whatever, at the very least, his aim and intent and his whole purpose was a good one, net benefit, right? Maybe there was some teenage bravado because he wanted to be tough and fierce. It doesn't matter because he was doing good things and had noble intentions along with maybe a little bit of bravado. If you could possibly know that, as if I could know his heart, right? None of us can make that claim or that judgment. So to pretend that like, oh, the right hero, making him a hero is just ridiculous and the part of this cultural problem. No, it's not. We should make laud people who want to go out and protect private property, and especially when the police are not doing their job. Here's one line, and then I'll shut up and let you guys chime in here. But here's one line from the article that I just wanted to spit take. For millions, he's become a positive symbol, a young man of action who stepped up when the police, parentheses, allegedly, stepped aside. When the police allegedly stepped aside? Do you think the police allegedly stepped aside before all the buildings were on fire or after? Which part were they allegedly stepping aside for, David French? No, the police were standing down. The police were doing nothing. The only reason he had to go there is because systematically across the United States, the police had been stepping down. So, no, David, it was not alleged. It was apparent.
Yeah, I like your point, Donnie, about the like his intentions, regardless of whether he was reckless or not, on it, his intentions were heroic, right? It was like, hey, I see something evil happening and something dangerous that could hurt innocent people and their livelihoods and property, and I'm going to go try and put a stop to it because I see no one else doing that, right? And that's a really heroic thing. And what's ironic, I don't really know much about David French, but like for him to say, you kind of have to go one of two ways, right? You got to say, yeah, Kyle Rittenhouse is heroic, or you got to say the people that were doing the other stuff were heroic, right? Because Kyle Rittenhouse is the antithesis of what those folks were doing. So to say that he's not heroic means to validate, as he would put it, right? They're validating the protesters and the rioters and all the people burning stuff down. So I don't know maybe he does view it that way. And
no,
I think
he shouldn't. I don't think he does.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's weird. That's a really weird view to have then, because it's like one of the craziest thing about that video that I saw was when he's running down the street from everyone, and he gets in the confrontation with those two guys. One of them hits him with a skateboard, and he shoots them and defends himself. And then like just down the street, like he walks to the police. Right, the police are all standing there. Like it's like, dude, like you're watching like a situation unfold in front of you, and they're doing nothing. Right, so it's not allegedly or anything like that. It's like, yeah, they were literally doing nothing. And you saw a kid being chased by a mob, and it's like, okay, like for sure the police were not heroes, right? And for sure the rioters aren't heroes. So I'm pretty sure you could say it's like, yeah, Rittenhouse is the hero in this. And at least you should validate his intention.
Tell me you didn't watch the video without telling me you didn't watch the video.
Dude, that's like this whole trial. It's like at this point, I've seen so many people on the left just saying clear-cut self-defense, that at this point, it's like, if you think he wasn't acting in self-defense, I think it is safe to say you have not watched any of the trial, like any of it, or at least not the highlights. I've watched a lot more than the highlights, but yeah, to me, this is sort of like the classic, I'll put conservative in scare quotes, the conservative approach, or at least National Review type, like, I don't know, this sort of conservative thing where we have to find the common ground in something. And so David French wants to write this piece like, hey, self-defense is reasonable, which is the opinion that anyone who's not blind and has watched the trial has. That's literally the correct opinion. There's no debate here. Apparently the jury's debating it, because as we record this, they spent a whole day and haven't decided yet. But there's no sensible people aren't debating this, really. It's self-defense, right? And so he comes out bravely in favor of the completely obvious conclusion to, throw a bone at what he supposedly is, a conservative, right? In favor of Second Amendment rights and self-defense. And then he wants to like kind of curry favor with, the regime and other operatives of the cultural elite. And he wants to say, yeah, but we shouldn't, the people on the right are bad who are trying to exalt him as a hero. But I don't see David French making a substantive argument here. I just see him trying to be the compromiser. Yeah. Like, the middle way is not always the right one. Occasionally it is. But in this case, I mean, how is Kyle Rittenhouse not a hero? He killed a pedophile and a wife beater in self-defense as he was trying to put out fires and help people. Like, how is he not? I mean, geez, like, I got a son. I hope he's a little bit like Kyle Rittenhouse. I don't know the whole kid's history, but he went out to defend his community.
Well, he played Call of Duty sometimes, Jeremy. So
yeah. Well, and what's this? What's this whole thing about? Like, he was a foolish kid wielding a deadly weapon. It's like, yeah, to defend himself. And he did it really well.
He did it really well.
He only hit the people who were attacking him, which is hard to do in that context.
And he hit one non-lethally. Like, that's incredible too. Like,
on his back and cleared a malfunction. Like, it's impressive. Under pressure too, man. Like, yeah.
It's I'm sympathetic to, and there's something to be said for, should he have been out there? He's a 17-year-old kid, right? I think, he should have been out there, helping people morally. Now, is it the wise thing to do to defend Kenosha, Wisconsin with your life? I don't know. Maybe he really loved his city because, his dad lived there, I guess, or something. I can't speak for that. I kind of am of the just let the cities burn mentality because I don't think they're salvageable. But at least from a moral standpoint, regardless of the, whether I would do it, what's what's impunable about his character here? I mean, it's just like,
Well, yeah. There's so many different like tactics they try to use to besmirch his character, and like the most important thing to realize is he's a 17-year-old. We like the whole premise of our opening is that we made really cringy posts when we were 17. We our brains are still developing, and the fact that like in all of this, his first instinct is self-defense and like self-preservation in the sense that he's not going out aggressively shooting. He's restrained. He's not taking people out just for the sake of it. Once they start going to him, and he's as restrained as he is, he gets hit by the skateboard after he shoots before he shoots the guy. Like he's not preemptively firing. He's not got an itchy trigger finger. The fact that he went there to protect people's property, did CPR on people, cleaned graffiti, those kinds of acts of service from some 17-year-old, like that's impressive. Like that's the kind of person who obviously has some level of nobility and thought, and is not just like some I'm an apathetic 17-year-old, I just care about trying to get away with underage drinking with my friends kind of a guy. And maybe he has some of that inclination, but obviously he's got some kind of character that's more than just that.
Whether he's
what they
perfect
don't
or not,
like,
he's a reasonable citizen. That's all. He's a good neighbor.
Yeah, what they don't like him for is the fact that he was there, right? Like I know there's been other stuff where it's like he came out, he like was getting in fights in in his school and stuff like that, and who knows how he is personally, right? But the thing that the media hates him for and that they claim is foolish is that he was there the day that people were trying to burn down his city, and he had the gall to try and protect it, and he did it reasonably well. If anyone's watched the trial, like there's testimony about him getting like pepper sprayed by people, right, and having death threats, lobbed at him by specifically, the Rosenbaum guy, and through all of that, right, he gets pepper sprayed, all these different things, and he doesn't use any lethal force in that, right? Like he flees the area, and then the only time he does actually use lethal force, right, is when he's cornered and someone's trying to grab his gun from him, and someone's fired a shot into the air, and he doesn't know if it's at him. It's like, man, I don't think there's any more clear cut sense that this kid was defending himself and was not there trying to like egg people on in a fight. And what's unfortunate, right, is that the prosecutor, that's kind of the line they've taken, right, is that, oh, well, he went there to try and provoke people to attack him. And what's kind of sucks is if he does get convicted as guilty and the verdict comes back that way, that will be the narrative, that if you are going to protect your community, you're trying to provoke these rioters to like fight you, right? And that's going to suck.
Well,
that's going to really suck and give them permission to do whatever they want in a lot of ways.
Well, but here's the thing, though. David French is helping your case there, Britt. He's taking the brave stand of saying that defending yourself is okay. Like, wow.
What a great conservative. Card carrying.
I'm inspired. I'm going to go on the record on this episode 28. Here we goes. Racism is bad. I know. A brave stance and very helpful. That's the kind of take this is, where he's saying like, I want to be popular with the people who are saying he was out there in a foolish for blood way, but he was just defending himself, so it's okay. But yeah, it's a stupid middle ground, and
he's legally in the right, but not morally in the right. The right thing to do is to allow leftist mobs with a prior criminal history of pedophilia and wife beating to destroy your town. That's the conservative position.
Here's the thing. I was trying to reconcile the point you made, Britt, about his conflicting, like, if Kyle isn't the hero, does that make the Black Lives? And I don't think it's either. I think there's a third hero at play here that he heroizes in his mind, and it's given away by that allegedly line. It's the police. I think that David French is such a simp for the government agents who let their city get burned by violent mobsters that he is not willing to admit that what Kyle Rittenhouse did was morally correct, because that would mean you admit that the government enforcement agency that's supposed to protect private property and life was immoral in that circumstance by standing down. And I don't think he's willing to do that. I think that would be why he has this position that he does. Because if the Black Lives Matter protesters aren't ethically in the right for destroying property, but Kyle Rittenhouse isn't in the right for stepping up when the police won't step up to defend property, that only leaves the third party of the police who stood down while this was going on to watch to be the correct moral position, where ethically you're not in the right if you're defending property. You're also not ethically in the right if you're destroying property. You're only ethically correct if you stand back like a passive little government puppy watchdog like you are and watch the violent men burn the city, and you just sit there with your tail between your legs. And this is why I don't carry water for Trump, but I understand the populist frustration with regime conservatives. It's like they sit back and they do nothing, and then they are like, why are we winning? It's like, because you're not doing anything and you're not taking a stand for anything, and you're saying that the correct moral action here is passivity, when it's clearly not.
Well, and they talk big about like, oh, having the Second Amendment means we couldn't possibly get overtaken by a tyrannical government. And then 2020 happens and our government turns tyrannical. And this kid who's been imbibing this correct message his whole life is like, I'm going to go defend my community. And now he's getting screwed by that government.
Well, and one final thought when we're talking about sort of David French being this like moderate in these things, I wrestle with the idea of moderate and moderation and all these things, because on the one hand there's the simpy libertarian idea that libertarianism is socially conservative or socially liberal and fiscally conservative. Like we're the true moderates. It's like, ew, gross, no. But you do find common ground with both sides on certain issues and certain ideas, and I like the Dave Smith quote, we're better than the left on the left. We can out-left the left, and we can outright the right. I like that much better. But I'm also, personally, I'm an Anglican, and I believe in the middle way in some things. So I have this tension, but I really, really do like the Ayn Rand quote, and I'm not a Randian. I think Ayn Rand is an interesting figure, not a great one, but an interesting figure who has some good points. And one of her quotes is, there are two sides to every issue, the right one and the wrong one, but the middle is always evil. And that to me it actually strikes kind of a biblical, I would rather them be cold than lukewarm. I want, I'm butchering that verse, but
it's the Laodicean church in Revelation, right? I would that you were cold or hot, not lukewarm.
Yes, exactly. And it's kind of that. It's not a perfect, every situation can be reductive down to this philosophy, but I do really like that idea because I think it illuminates a lot how people think sometimes I'm a moderate means that it's the right way, and it's like, no, when it comes to virtue, I don't want to be a moderate. I want to be an extremist when it comes to virtuous and virtue things. So
well, and so does David French. You mentioned that. You mentioned that this is David French's perspective on how to be a hero, to be the righteous person, is to sit and do nothing. I think you did miss one thing though, Donald, and I have to correct you on this. The other way to be a righteous person is to write articles about how the person who defended himself in Kenosha is a bad person, even though he should probably not go to jail for life. That's another way to be just truly the pinnacle of righteousness. So,
You got me there. Well, unless you guys have any last thoughts, we'll wrap up this episode. Any other outstanding favorite moments from the trial?
Oh gosh, you need to do a whole episode on that.
That's true.
Cringe attorney quotes.
I was gonna say, I think my favorite was when they were interviewing the guy with the skateboard, and they're like, "So you took off running after Kyle Rittenhouse?" And he's like, "No." It's like, "But you were running in the direction Kyle Rittenhouse was in." "Yes." "Did it have something to do with Kyle?" "Yes." "So you were running at him?" "No." It's
the Bill Clinton on the stand, right?
Britt and I, it seems like every few episodes reference that SpongeBob meme of Patrick and the wallet, and that is what this was in court. It was you were running after him. No. Okay, so you were running in his direction. Yes. It had to do with him. Yes. So you were running after him. No. So, okay. Anyway, I just had to get that off my chest. I thought it was such a great moment. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. Thanks to our guest, Jeremy, for being here. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being on here. Do you want to do one last pitch for your show? One last shout out?
Yeah, the John 3:15 podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and on YouTube now. We just started doing video podcasts. And would love to have you guys tune in. We tend to do episodes less frequently, but kind of longer form and kind of on the same topic. So a different format than Cringe Posts and not so much political. But if you're interested in the Bible at all, it's a real hoot. So
I've subscribed.
And I hear a really, really cool guest is coming on soon. So
They say.
Hypothetically,
Yeah.
they say. Yeah. So, wonderful. Well, thanks so much. We will see you on the next one. Until then, take care.
Thanks, guys.